Introduction to book publishing. One of the things that's going to be quite interesting about the internships this year is that we are, we are going to be doing we're going to be trialing a piece of technology with you. This is an arrangement we have from support from the IMDA. So I want to talk about that a little bit first before I introduce you to the question of what is publishing, a little bit of a look at publishing in Singapore, and then open it up for some questions and look at sort of issues facing the industry. But before that, let me tell you a bit about this technology. It's a new media technology, and it has the ability. What's interesting about it is it has the ability to kind of rewire our brain circuitry in very positive ways, connecting parts of the brain for visual perception, audio perception, pattern recognition, and so on. And this process, in this process, actually helps our ability to think deeply and critically. It's got the learning and knowledge building capability, but also the ability to help people to empathize. And it particularly is good at enhancing our capacity to understand others' perspectives, to build our own understanding of the theory of mind, to help you walk in the shoes of others. It's got lots of great features. It's got an enhanced user interface, which has been extensively user tested and improved over the years. Its screens are fantastic with a much higher level of pixel density than the latest mobile phones. It's highly mobile, easily carried, personalizable, annotation features, highly energy efficient. And what's great in today's world is it's also about 100% recyclable and sustainable in its production and use of natural resources. And what this new technology is, and I'll show it to you now, is, of course, ta-da, the book. I'm sorry, I know it's a bit cheesy, right? But here it is. It does all those things I said it would. It's got this incredible, highly defined user interface that has been refined over a very long time. And it's something that I think we've come to appreciate in the digital world in a new way. Let me get you back to the presentation. The book, so old it's new again. Reading the book has been, this is a Rembrandt etching from 1634, reading the picture that hasn't changed. 400 years of reading, and the experience is the same. But, so it's not new. Okay, book is not new. But our understanding and appreciation of the book is new. And this has come out of a series of studies using a new technology called functional MRI. It's an MRI scan of the brain. And what they can do now is use these MRIs to scan the brain while someone is doing something. So they can check and see and measure the different parts of the brain that are used during different tasks. And there's a particular lab in the US in Boston, which has been focusing on reading and looking very closely at different kinds of reading, at children when they learn to read, as they're learning to read, and so on. And so we have a much better, much deeper understanding of what the brain, what's going on in the brain as we learn to read and as we read. And, you know, think about it, it's a pretty magical process, something which for us is very second nature. Took about 80,000 years to develop, to get to the stage where our brains were able to do this. And kids still take some while to do it. They take about 2,000 days to learn to read. And it's a process of building neural pathways in the brain between those different sections of the brain that I talked about. It's a cumulative process, and like all work processes, if you don't do it, if you stop doing it, you get a bit rusty. And those pathways in the brain that are built up through use begin to decay a little bit. So it's super important for kids, as their brains are very plastic and very malleable at a young age. but it's also very important for older adults because our brains need to be kept flexible. Multilingualism is great, and they've sort of looked at different kinds of reading, Chinese characters, for example, versus Roman text, phonetic text, and they use different circuits and they work in different ways. So, I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail about this, a bit geeky, but it's about, you know, the brain sort of has to recognize letters or ideographs, and then has to figure out, connect those letters into groups of words, and has to understand the word connected to an audio word that you've heard before, and then words connected into sentences and so on. And all of that process, and then building pathways so that you don't actually, when you see the word vocabulary, you're not seeing the V and the O and the C, you're seeing the word vocabulary and the concept vocabulary, and all of the associations of that idea are actually now present in your brain. So that it's that process that reading enables, requires, enables. And if it doesn't build on itself, if you don't have a good base of words when you start going to school, for example, then it can lead to problems in the cycle of building more of these pathways connection move in a different direction. Kids can get in trouble in school and that sort of thing. There's a great new book that summarizes all of this called Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World by Marianne Wolf. I won't read the quote for you, but it's made quite a big impact, not least in Singapore, I'm happy to say. So this is the conclusion. Well, it's been the conclusion for some time from the scientists and the doctors who study childhood development. Reading regularly with your children stimulates and optimizes the optimal, it's blocked by my thing, I can't even read it. So you can read it better than I can. But these skills are skills that last a lifetime. Young Anais there is probably not quite able to read yet, since she's only, I think, at that point, just 2 years old. But she's learning the habit of reading. Her papa and her mama read to her, and she knows that books are something fun and part of the environment around her. And that's the advice. That's the advice from scientists. Start right away. Start when they're 1.5, 2 years old, even if they can't possibly be learning to read yet. They're being socialized to it, and the pattern recognition and visual skills are already there. You can see in this picture, the second picture, she's really focused on the page. She's looking at it very carefully. And that's in contrast to the screen. The screen is also, of course, super important and very important that we all have the skills. But there's the growing evidence that it's better to start with print and that screen skills can come later. And that's actually now the view of Singapore's Ministry of Education. We, Publishers Association had a meeting the other day, and they were very clear on that. Primary school would continue to focus on text, on printed materials. And however, by the time kids get to secondary school, there'd be a much, much greater focus on digital skills, since those are increasingly important. And so more learning would be done on screen. But print will be where we start. And there's a scientific, it's not a sentimental thing, there's a scientific basis for that. And that's why, and it's not just our Ministry of Education, it's all the way to the top. So that's why the National Reading Movement was started 4 or 5 years ago, and its focus, its beginning focus, not the only focus, but the beginning focus was to get kids to read. And support and modeling of that came right from the top. So, reading. So old, it's new again. Okay. Why do we read? What are the what's it all about? Okay, you know, it trains the brain, but for what? Well, I think this is kind of interesting. There's all sorts of reasons to read, and so I'll just this is just to kind of get you thinking about that and thinking about why you read and why you might be interested to help other people read by getting involved in publishing. One reason we read is because for many of us, our deepest views about the universe and other humans are tied up in texts in books. Half of the world belongs to religions that they call the religion of the book, based on based on the Word of God in writing, right, in a book. And so you read to perfect your relationship with God, with the universe, with fellow humanity. It's a pretty important reason to read, and it, for a long time, was really the only reason to read. I mean, reading and religion were tied very much together, not only in the Christian and Muslim traditions, but also in Buddhism and other faiths too. But it's not the only reason to read. Reading for knowledge. Lisa reads because she's just hungry to know things. That's it, you know. She's reading for knowledge and for experience. Everybody's favorite reader. We read to remember. We read to have a history. I don't know how many of you saw the Korean drama Rookie Historian, but it's all about the role of government. The important role in government is the historian, who is records what happens and is protected from political forces, because it's so important, no matter what the changing whims of the emperor are, to be able to have a record of what happened. And so it's a, I'm not against Korean drama, okay? I'd rather read a book, but I'll watch a little drakor from time to time. And especially if it's one that knows what it's talking about when it comes to the importance of books. And when the stars are so good looking, yeah, too. Reading to change the world, that's Tolstoy. It's a painting of Tolstoy in the Chechikov Museum in Moscow, public domain, so I'm reproducing it. And, Tolstoy wrote books about what do we do to change the world? What is to be done? And books like this had a huge influence in the 20th century, some good, some bad. But ideas about how to change the world. We read to try to keep things the same. This is a photo which I tried very hard but couldn't find the origins of. It's been floating around in Pinterest for a long time now. It's kind of one of the problems with the internet as a publishing mechanism, is that content gets very unmoored from its context. So I couldn't find, if anybody knows the exact source of this information. I don't think it's actually a bookshop. I think it's a library. But here we have the British residents of London reading, because reading is a sign of normality. Reading preserves the world no matter what crisis is going on around us. And we read to connect. We read for emotional experience. We connect with the characters, with the voice of the author, but we also connect with other readers who are having that same emotional experience. Adrian Tomine is a wonderful illustrator who's got a fantastic ability to capture, who focuses on reading and books quite a bit and does a marvelous job. And of course, we read to dream. We read to escape. And that's not just something we do since they invented Harry Potter or The Wizard of Oz or whatever fantasy, Lord of the Rings, whatever fantasy novels you got into. It's been going around for a long time. And of course, we read to learn things, to know things for practical purposes. We read because we want to know how to do stuff. We read because we want to improve ourselves. Hopefully, most of you have slightly better motives in wanting to do stuff than Wile E. Coyote. But he was a pretty great book reader. He's always got a new book to read, trying to learn something new. But most of what we're reading of this sort is, books like this. And these are among the sort of books that are very popular in Singapore. Different cultures in different countries have different reading cultures. Some places are very literary. They say Argentina, I would say Taiwan has got a very literary culture. Singapore's got a very strong reading culture, I think, but we're quite practical. And our literary culture is growing rapidly and quickly and in very interesting ways. But our reading culture is probably first and foremost a pragmatic one. We read for practical purposes to upgrade and improve ourselves. So let me stop the share for a second. And maybe we can open it up to some introductions. Are we able to do that one?
All right, just give me a moment.
Sure. If I could start with the interns, maybe just ask you to introduce yourself. I'm going to start kind of in order that I see you here. If you're working for a publishing company and not an intern, please pass. Let's let the interns introduce themselves first. Gabriella, you're the first one I see on my screen. Can you just introduce yourself? Tell us what institution you're from, where you'll be interning, and maybe the last book you've read.
Hi, I'm Gabriella. My institution is the NUS. Yeah. And the last book I read, I haven't actually finished it. I'm still in the middle of it, but it's A Little Life. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. Yeah, a little sad, I think, that book.
I think it's very sad.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, Gabrielle, well, where will you be interning?
Tusitala.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Faiz, you're next on my list.
Hi everyone, my name is Faiz. I'm from Nanyang Technical University, year 3 in philosophy right now, and I'll be working with Open Express soon. And the last book I read was actually, sorry, Open Express. Yeah. And
oh, sorry, what was? Yeah.
Sorry, Open Express.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about it. And the last book I read was John McDowell's Mind and the World.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Faiz. Sorfina, how about you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see Kermit the Frog too.
Yeah, my name is Sorfina. I'm from NTU. I'll be attached to SBPA. I can't remember what book I've last read, but I think it's called Anita and Me. It's been a while since I've read a book.
Okay. Well, hopefully that will change a little bit because you'll be introduced to so many wonderful books in this process. Who's next? Jean?
Hello, I'm Jean. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm Jean. I'm also from NTU. Yeah, I know Sofina. Yeah.
You'd be sitting next to her. You'd be sitting next to each other if we were doing this normally.
Yeah, I think so. The last book I read, if children books count, is a book that I'm currently translating for my company, September 21. It's called Prince Nila Discovers a New Kingdom. So.
Oh yeah, is that the one with the AR with the
yeah, it is.
reality?
It's the first AR book. Yeah.
And
so
what language are you translating it into?
Chinese. Yeah.
Okay. It would be fun to talk to you about the challenges of translation.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, Sofina, Gabriella, Jean, Sarah Jane.
Hello. Hi. I'm
Hi.
Sarah. I'm from NTU as well. And I realized I already know two of my cohort mates here, Jean and Sofina. Yeah, so I'm gonna be with ilovereading.sg. And currently the book that I'm still reading and have yet to complete is Murakami's Kafka on the Shore. Yeah,
oh, great.
I got it.
Yeah.
I got it at a secondhand bookstore when I was on exchange. So yeah, it's quite special in that sense.
Is it your first Murakami book?
Yes, it's my first Murakami book.
Okay, because problem with Murakami is once you start, it gets hard to stop, I find. Enjoy. Sinyi, how about you?
Okay, hi, my name is Cindy. I'm from NUS, and same as Sarah, I'm working under ilovereading.sg. So the most recent book I've read and I'm still reading is The Versions of Us by Laura Bennett. Yeah.
I don't know that. What's it about?
It's actually more of like a semi-love slash a family story. So it actually depicts the story in two different perspectives. So both in the female and the male leads. So like they kind of talk about the same scenario, but in two totally different like views. So it gives like the viewer like two different perspectives into how the whole story spans out.
Great. Yeah, well, like I was saying earlier about the books being good for empathy, for building empathy, that's precisely the kind of device that allows that. And of course, literary fiction is great about helping us understand different points of view, both trustworthy and untrustworthy ones. Yeah, that was pretty cheesy. My new technology, here's a book, right? I hope you'll forgive me for that. I think we've met all the interns. Have we met all the interns? Anybody? Did we skip anybody? Oh, one new message.
I have not introduced myself.
Oh, Cindy, sorry. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused because there's two Singies. I'm Singi.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm currently working with September 21, and my book that I'm reading now is by September 21. It's Prince Nila Discovers a New Kingdom.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got two people reading that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite a nice book. I really recommend you guys to get it because it's like a children's book, and I always believe that children's book got the like power to share more of it has a lot more value than what we expect. Like an example that I always bring up is maybe how Cinderella could be seen as like a happy ending story, but if we look at it another way, Cinderella went from one prison to another prison where the prince just judged her for her looks.
Yes, kids' books are really important. I'll tell a story now. I was at a very high-profile dinner at a book fair in Taiwan, hosted by the then Minister of Culture in Taiwan, who was herself a best-selling writer, Long Yun Tai. And I was surrounded by publishers, and I was there representing, Singapore Book Publishers Association. So I talked to the guy next to me, and he said, "Oh, what brought you to Singapore?" And I said, we were talking about, how I came as a graduate student to Singapore to study Singapore. I said I don't know how it came up, but I said, I was interested in this German philosopher's approach to studying societies and how Singapore matched that, the philosophers Jürgen Habermas. And they said, "Oh, so you must read German." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm sorry. I read Habermas only in English translation." He said, "Oh, I studied in Berlin. I actually studied with Habermas." I was like, wow, fantastic. What do you do now? And he said, "Well, I'm a children's book publisher." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Habermas to children's books." And he said, "Yes, of course. If you want to change the world, you have to start with kids when they're young." So you're not the only one to think that children's books are really important, and that there are a lot of lessons. And of course, there's a lot of interesting stuff hiding in myths and folk stories. So, so welcome everybody. Thanks. Sorry to miss you, Cindy.
It's okay.
And let me come back to the presentation. Nice to have some feedback, because it was a little weird just talking into the computer. So let me come back to the presentation a little bit and talk a bit more about what is publishing, and then maybe I'll pause after a little while, and we can have, if you have any questions about the presentation at that point, we can start. So let's go back. And where's my keynote? There's my keynote. So what is publishing? I can go on and on about this, but just a few quick thoughts. It's first and foremost, it's a very old profession. For a media business, it's one that's been going for a long time. In 800,000 years in Asia. Depends on how you want to count the beginning. About 500 years, 450, 500 years in Europe. So we've got some staying power. It's old, but I like to think not too old-fashioned. So old that it's new again. Changing for sure. Here's one of my famous, my favorite, this is a library, one that I haven't yet visited, but I must get to soon. And it holds the Buddhist canon, the Korean Buddhist canon. So all of the texts of Buddhism were collected and printed in the 13th century in Korea using wood blocks. And those wood blocks are still there in this Buddhist temple and are actually still being used 750 years later, being used to print pages to replace or to gradually renew the many volumes here. So publishing often started, we were talking about religion and publishing before, it often did start as part of religious institution. Publishing, there's an important stream of like the oldest publishing house in Southeast Asia that I know of is De La Salle University Press in the Philippines, which started in the, now I've forgotten the date, 16th, maybe early 17th century. And it must be a bit later than that. I think it's 17th century. And was started by Jesuit priests who came and set up a religious institution in the Philippines and started printing books and publishing books already then. And that monastery became a university, and that university is still publishing books mostly on literature. Of course, most people, when they talk about, so the big story was the invention of printing in Europe, the so-called print revolution, which got started around the 1500s. And it was a lot of factors coming together. The idea of movable type, the Koreans had already figured that out some years earlier, some centuries earlier, but it worked pretty well for Roman languages. Cheaper paper, oil-based ink. There were a few cities which had broken free of the church, so they were able to try new things when it came to knowledge. And all of this led to the printing revolution. That printed page doesn't date, this dates 150 years after the revolution started, but it's a nice illustration of an old printing press. And you can see the pages drying up in the rafters and curing after they've been printed. But it really is a global phenomenon, the publishing. It came to different places at different times. This is a book of the early Edo period. It's the tale of Genji, the kind of first modern psychological novel, if you will, which was written in Japan 500 years earlier, but which became popular had been circulated before that in handwritten copies, but it was woodblock print with illustrations in the 17th century, and led to the explosion of the publishing and other entertainment industries in Japan in that time. And publishing has a long history in Singapore as well. The modern port, the colonial port of Singapore, was founded by book publishers, I like to say. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but the top colonial officials, their biggest desire was to publish a book about their experiences. And Raffles, of course, published a couple, and John Crawford, who came after Raffles, published even more. And one of the things that they used to justify the whole colonial endeavor at this time was the mission to save souls. That was the sort of excuse given. And printing the Bible in Chinese was one of the actually big projects of Singapore for some years in its early founding. The London Missionary Society, which was really all about publishing, established itself in Singapore in 1819, the year that Raffles came. It took a few years before its printing press was set up. So that whole colonial endeavor, Enlightenment age, is very much tied up with publishing as well. And Singapore, early colonial Singapore, was a kind of print tech innovation hub. The problem they were trying to solve was, how could they print materials for the China market, Christian materials, and what would be faster? Could they create metal type for Chinese characters, or should they just hire really good woodblock carvers from China because they were so efficient? So they actually were trying to solve this problem, figured it out. So they actually brought a team of woodblock carvers and ran experiments side by side to see who was faster, mostly in Malacca, but also in Singapore. And then Singapore had its own Chinese type foundry making Chinese type in the 1830s. What happened to this story is after the Opium Wars, the Brits got their piece of China, they got Hong Kong. And so the whole endeavor moved to Hong Kong and then spread into China. So it was a brief window, but it was important to giving some energy to the Singapore colony. And what's interesting too is that technology and the curiosity about that technology spread very quickly. One of the most important writers in Malay, Munshi Abdullah, was fascinated by printing and did a lot of translation work and published a lot of books. This is an early example, 1860s publication in Malay, written in Jawi. And again, we had technologies were changing and developing. What was faster, to create type in Malay, in Jawi, Arabic script to write Malay, or lithography, which is a different technology where you can actually use a brush and write on the stone. And in fact, lithography was won out. So Singapore was a hotbed of publishing in Malay language and other Asian languages in the later part of the 19th century. With a lot of innovation and literally dozens of it was a real hub of publishing, mostly around Arab Street. And you can see some of that, you can see some exhibits about that in the Malay Heritage Center on Arab Street. So it's been around for a while. Singapore is very much part of the story, I would say. But what is it exactly? Okay, it's making books, right? But I think it's, if you look a little bit deeper, it's a very old and very important part of any kind of complex culture, literate culture. It's not the only complex culture, of course, but the ones we have now. And publishing it's actually about bringing people together. I mean, you're working with, you need the skill to work with the text, to work with the images and the illustrations and so on. You need to work with the people who are creating all of this. You structure it, you package it, you present it, you disseminate it. But really what you're doing is gathering people together around this content. So you're creating a public. You're creating groups who share certain content and who have that content in common. So that's why I see it as kind of creating publics. You could, if you put all this material together and you create this beautiful book, but nobody ever reads it, you haven't fulfilled, that's not real publishing. That's only part of the equation. Now, we've talked a lot about books, and that's our favorite kind of form. And it's central, I think, to the story of publishing and to the trajectory of publishing. But it may itself as a container be a little bit less important. And we're seeing more and more of this in the digital world. This is an artwork by Singapore artist Heman Chong. And it's a copy of Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, an illustrated book published in 1919, together with a printout of the text downloaded from Project Gutenberg. So which is the book? Is the book that beautiful printed object with the nice tooled leather bindings that we never see anymore, really nice? Or is the book the text, and the text that now lives in the internet and can be downloaded and cut and pasted and shared and printed out on your home computer? Where is the book actually? Where is the content? So the containers are changing. But let me say that I think even the print book these days is very much a digital object. We're kind of telling the IMDA this as often as we can. It's something that's created digitally. It's written, yes, there are still authors who will write things out in longhand, Many people prefer to write in longhand as a start, perhaps, but most of the book production is done digitally. It's edited and produced on screens. We edit in Microsoft Word and online platforms. It's often distributed digitally, and more it's even printed digitally. Marketing and selling is increasingly done on digital platforms. And of course, nowadays, we're more and more reading our books digitally or even listening to books. Audiobooks is the fastest growing segment. Digital audiobooks is the fastest growing segment in the publishing industry. Ours was really the first industry to be hit hard by the digital transformation, and that started in the 1980s. So we've been dealing with digital for a long time. And don't forget that the revolution in e-commerce started with books. Amazon started with us. And we've been living with the impact of that for 20 years. 20 years. We still think, oh, you wake up in the morning and think, hey, Amazon, they're here. They've been here for 20 years. Maybe I'll pause there and see if we have any questions and maybe ask you guys a couple questions. So how many of you have read ebooks? Just type into the chat if you or if you want to speak up. Nobody's read an ebook? No. I'm sure you've been reading, you've had to read, you know, like PDFs in class or something. Cool. And how many of, so a few of us, how many have listened to audiobooks? Cool. Yeah, sometimes read together with a hard copy. That's what I was going to say. That, you mean reading at the same time? That's Cindy Cho. Reading at the same time, the audiobook and the hard copy book together? Like a read aloud kind of function? Yeah. Yeah, that's quite an interesting, use of the AR technology, right? To add sound to the books. There's a company in the US which has got a twist on that, which I find really interesting, using smart speakers. So what they do, you sign up for the smart speaker. So you have your smart speaker next to you and you read a book to your kid. And the smart speaker listens to you reading the book. Obviously, it's got to be a book that the smart speaker program knows about. And as it listens to you read the book, it adds sound effects. So it knows, it's recognizing where you are in the text and introducing sound effects to go along with your reading the storybook. So there's lots to be done. And September 21 is a bit of a pioneer in Singapore with putting all of this stuff together. There's lots of interesting experimentation that can be done. So yeah, the book is changing, but the experience of reading, I mean, there's also a limit to how much you want to add on to reading. We all went through a phase as publishers, starting with a CD-ROM actually, where we were going to all add all of this interaction to the reading experience. But I think we've come to appreciate that the reading experience also needs its own space. So we're getting smarter about when we add these enhancements, like when we're reading to kids and we want to make the reading a kind of theatrical experience with sound and sound effects and video. And when we want to just read and learn, and you know, how to switch between these modes in ways that give us energy. So I think that's the kind of progress that we're making in the multimedia side of books. Okay, let me go back to any other questions? Okay, go back to the presentation. You don't want to see that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about publishing as a business. Book publishing is kind of transformed, or anyway, there's a bigger, maybe there's a better way to put it, there's a bigger landscape out there of information industries, which book publishing used to be a dominant part of, but now is kind of, as this industry has spread out, we find ourselves in different places. So the information industry ecosystem, in the view of a company called Outsell, which tracks this, is a big industry, $766 billion. I think that's pretty old data, 2016, if I'm not wrong. And it includes things like consumer books at 48 billion, but also the news industry, yellow pages and directories, market research, credit reports, you know, banks buy reports about the credit ratings of companies and individuals, so on. And SBPA members, our book publishing members, you will find in different areas here. In consumer books, in scientific, technical, and medical education, and in medical publishing, and in educational content and technology. So we're dispersed in different parts of this graph. But consumer books are still a $48 billion business. We're a growing business among media. So this graph captures growth rates. It doesn't capture total size. So yes, VR industry is growing really fast, but it's still pretty small. OTT video, over-the-top video, Netflix, etc., is growing really fast and is really pretty big. Internet advertising, video games, and esports are growing, but books are still growing. Not quite as fast as the other industries, but we still are. And in a way that's you know, growing more than traditional television, which has been so badly disrupted. These are the figures from PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Entertainment and Media Outlook, which is probably the best global study of media markets. So we are a growth industry. Don't get anybody to tell you that books are a sunset industry. Growth is particularly strong in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Thailand, countries like Vietnam. These are countries which are experiencing much higher growth in book publishing. Indonesia, over the last few years, more like 15% growth as an industry. And this is the slide which tries to explain what we do in publishing. This is the publishing value chain. And let me go through and talk about each of these boxes a little bit. Content creation, I hope that's reasonably self-explanatory. Coming up with the story, the text, the photos, the illustrations, the ideas, the structuring, the way to put it together. But publishers then acquire that content. We either go out and find it, so we go to an author and we say, we really like that article you wrote in the magazine, we think that would make a great book, how about it? Or we make a call and say, anybody has a great novel we're interested to publish, young adult novels, say, please send them to us. And then we have to filter and decide. Whatever means you acquire, whether passively asking people to send you stuff in and sorting through and filtering out what you think is the best, or more actively saying, okay, please write 10,000 words on this subject. I want you to contribute to the Encyclopedia of Singapore. Please write on this subject, so on. Whichever method you use, it's content acquisition and commissioning. Content development. Different publishers spend more or less time on that. Education publishers tend to do a lot. So you have the material, but you need to structure it. You need to tie it together. You need to cut it, shape it, form it, develop that content, often in very much close collaboration with the authors. Quality control is really important here. Publishers invest a lot. a book that goes out has their name on it. They're legally liable in many cases for what's inside the book. So quality control is super important, and publishers will have processes for that. Copy editing, making sure that all the details are correct, all the language is correct. This is a big part of what we do, and I'm sure you'll be exposed to how copy editing works in the different companies you're working on. Design, I have a text, but what typeface should I use? What form should it take? How big should the type be? How should it look on the page? What shape should the book be? The form and the shape and the size and the feel and even the smell of the book are all factors in how a book is received. And so publishers make those decisions. Then once we've decided on that, we have to get the book into that form. And that's a process we call typesetting, setting the book into type, into a form that it will be reproduced in. Once it's set into that process, we have to proofread it. Is everything in the right place? Did I repeat a paragraph twice? Oh my God, it's happened. Are there any typos in there? Let's just make sure it's okay. And once it's all okay and in the form we want it in, we send it off for printing. So printing the book comes quite late in the stage and is really just one part of the process. Printing and binding and the finishing of the book are separate processes, but usually handled by a single partner. Once the book is there, then we have to market it. We have to let people know about it. We have to tell the world about it. And this is a really important part of publishing. Like I remember I talked about publishing as being bringing a public together. So that means you've got, this is the other half of the equation. All of that leads up to producing all of those first steps, but then you've got to get the word out and you've got to create the public for that book. The physical book, actually the digital book too, needs to be distributed, needs to be kept somewhere safe, needs to be distributed out to all of the different retailers and vendors. And there's a whole complicated system of doing that, especially when you're exporting into different markets. And then there's the actual selling of the book, done by our great partners, the bookshops, done online, done directly by publishers in pop-ups, book fairs, and so on, many different ways, to the retail customer, but also very importantly to the libraries, because the libraries are a crucial outlet for reading, but also discovering and finding new books. So that's the chain, right? We sort of start with the content and work our way through this process to come out with the books. One of the first things you can do in your company, I think, to sort of orient yourself and understand where your company is to figure out which parts of the process are done by the company itself and which parts are done by various partners. And actually, all of these can be done by partners, or only part of it can be done by partners. This, I think, if I remember correctly, was sort of the NUS Press approach. We, well, not exactly, we don't create much content ourselves, very little. But we do the acquisition, and we do some development, not as much as I'd like, because it's hard work and takes a lot of resources. So we're not always able to do content development that we like, but we do some. We definitely do quality control, copy editing. Design, we do some in-house and some we outsource. Typesetting is mostly outsourced. Proofreading and editing, we actually use a lot of freelancers, so that's a mix. Printing and binding is entirely outsourced. We work with printers for that. Sales and marketing, we do a lot ourselves, but we also work with our supply chain partners. We have a small warehouse in the office, Faiz, you'll see it soon. But we also have most of our books in a bigger warehouse with our partner. And we sell books ourselves a little bit. Most publishers are selling books ourselves, but we really also depend on our bookshop partners as well. So let me pause there. Are there any questions about this value chain? I'll keep it up on screen. Maybe if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand, and Juan can give you audio access to this. Let's try this. Sorry, I keep trying new variations on our Zoom call, but maybe we can try that. Anybody have any questions? Maybe it's better if we take it off for a second because I can't see the chat. We have a question from one of our publishers. Where do the ebook and audiobook processes begin? Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Where it's really up to the pub. Well, ebooks I consider. Yeah, let's go back to the screen. Have a look at that. There's kind of two ways to do it. Usually it's the handoff between proofreading and printing and binding, because you don't want to do an ebook that hasn't been proofread, right? So you want to make sure everything is absolutely pucka, everything is correct and ready to go. And then you can send it for ebook production at the same time as you send it for printing. Some people will release the ebook and the print book simultaneously. So the sales and marketing for both will start at the same point. Other people may do a bit of windowing where you let the print book go first and you sell that before you do the ebook. It all depends on your markets and your different strategies. Yeah, I would say most people would do that. They would make sure that the quality control and the copy editing and the design are all done. The ebook design might be quite different. And you could maybe, you know, skip a last step. You could sort of do a parallel track of proofreading of the ebook alone if you wanted. Audiobook, pretty much the same. The tricky part in the audiobook is checking and editing the audio production. So making sure that the voice talent has done a good job reading the book and hasn't skipped any bits or read any bits correctly and so on. Yes, a question from Sarah about, you know, how to the scope that companies, how do you choose content? Yeah, different. So because we have to create a public for books, right? The publishers have to bring people together around books. It's a bit hard if you have too many different subjects and if you have too many different groups that you're trying to bring together. So it's much easier if you are bringing more books for one public. So if your group is, you know, Singapore parents who want to educate and entertain their children, then, you know, the sales and marketing to that group is more efficient than if you also want to reach, say, businessmen who are looking for advice on how to plan their investment strategies. So most companies will, and so it's very hard to, you know, it's hard to market for two different groups that are, so it's much easier to market a new book to an audience that you've already built. So most publishers will have fields and subjects that they're strong in and which they look to bring, they want to publish more and more in. Some publishers are very specific and very narrow in a niche, and that's great because that means their content can be their marketing can be very focused. Other publishers are a bit more broad. You're doing, you know, the publisher brand then becomes just a marker of quality because you may be publishing nonfiction, children's books, and fiction and literary fiction. So it's very different, but that's kind of one of the key tasks of the publisher is to try to establish a voice, try to build an audience, and to create a formula that allows you to find new audiences, but allows you to be efficient in gathering the public for your books. Okay, we can take any more. If you have any more questions about the value chain, we can take them as we go along. So what do publishers do? Well, so Sarah's question was about this first point, content acquisition and what we call list development. The books that we publish, in totality, that's our list. So editors will talk about my list, the list of books which I have acquired and or developed. And you know, as an editor, you are proud of the list that you've created. It's an investment, right? We're deciding, we're putting resources into these books. So there's an investment and there's a risk that publishers take. This skill and ability to develop the content, to work with authors, quality control, the management and coordination of all of this, and crucially, the sales and marketing. Recently, one of the best publishers in the world, well, he had that kind of, he was called that. Everyone, this guy named Sunny Mehta, who's the publisher of Knopf books in the US, who started off in the Indian publishing industry. And another very good Indian publisher used to work with him, posted this on Facebook, that the Sunny hallmark was outstanding design and strong marketing alongside the selection of books. Yet another lesson he taught me. Whenever I hear a publisher say, I only care about the books, sales and marketing don't count, I think to myself, you're no publisher. Great publishers love marketing and sales and all of the other stuff that makes it the selling of books. Because it's the selling of books, and here, that's cheeky, and let me add on to that. It's because the selling of books is bringing that public together. The selling of the books is getting the books into the community and creating a public around that book. So it's both sides of the equation. A lot of people get involved in publishing because they like reading, because they think it's good, they like writing, they think maybe they'd be good at editing, and that is terrific, but the marketing side of the business has actually got a lot of the creativity and a lot of the energy of publishing. So do take the opportunity. In your internships, you'll probably be involved in both, and I hope you're enthusiastic for both. Even doing sales, manning the booth at the book fair and so on is a great way to learn about the industry, because you're learning about why people are interested in certain books, how difficult it is, what the tricks are, how to persuade people to take that first step to read the book. Let me talk a little bit about the industry in Singapore. This is how we present ourselves. We're a globally competitive industry, and we're the infrastructure for key drivers of Singapore's knowledge economy. So our scientific, technical, medical publishers and our scholarly publishers are here to power the R&D of Singapore's R&D economy and to help link our researchers globally. Some of our members are from the world's biggest education, scientific publishers, have headquarters or Asian headquarters or operations in Singapore. Our education publishers are partners with parents, teachers, and the ministry on the crucial mission of education. And we're bringing Singapore's brand to the world. Our Singapore education publishers are exporting Singapore education books around the world. And we're a pillar of the creative economy. I believe quite firmly that writing is the master art of storytelling, and that the writers and the ideas nurtured in publishing create content and brands and develop audiences for film, gaming, television, and other media industries. I've seen lots of movies and TV shows that are based on books. I've read a few books based on movies. I read a couple, you know, Star Trek novelizations, but you know, it's not the same thing. I haven't read any books based on video games, but that's also quite a big genre. So our view is that a healthy creative and literary publishing scene will power all the rest, is a key driver and power of all the rest of our media economy. It's not a view that's necessarily widely accepted in the Singapore media scene, but it's what we believe. And we contribute about $2.4 billion to the local economy. Singapore's got about a trillion 1.3 economy, so that's not a huge amount, but it's a useful contribution. This is comparing book publishing against other parts of the media industry in Singapore. So the newspaper advertising market in the hands of one player basically is about 500 million. These figures are a bit old. I should update them. This is probably 3 years old now, maybe more. Television advertising, about 400 million. I think that's gone down. That's what it was some time back. And publishing, book publishing is about 400 million in the revenue and the sales at retail prices. So the money that is spent in Singapore by the public to buy books, about $400 million. That compares with cinema exhibition at about 200 million, events, concerts, and so on about 100 million, and the magazine advertising market of about 80 million. And again, I think that's reducing. So we're fairly big player on the scene, and we do it all on our own. It's a fairly independent industry. We don't have a, we're not, there monopolies, government licensed monopolies in the industry. But it's tough. We're competing for share of wallet in Singapore households against some pretty compelling other things. And so people will think nothing of spending a couple $100 a month on their telco bills, and spending, actually that figure for tuition has gone up in the latest figure, nearly doubled, spending $250 a month on tuition average across Singapore households, but we're not getting quite so much for books. So these are the kind of competition that we see in terms of business, if you want to look at it that way. The National Library is part of the national reading movement that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. The National Library has started to survey reading, which is great. However, this slide in particular really pisses me off. Not because of the findings, which I think are reasonably encouraging, right? At 70% of Singapore residents have read a book, in the last 12 months, and 60% of them have read at least 5 books. And that's roughly comparable with figures around the world. It's not the highest, but it's definitely not the lowest. It's not bad, actually. What pisses me off about this slide is the way the question is asked. Are adults still reading books? Okay, sorry, just a pet peeve. Yeah, that's the data. It's not too bad. What format do adults read in? Again, this is the NLB survey of 2018. And physical books are still super important, but it's interesting to see that the proportion of people reading ebooks is going up. Proportion of reading audiobooks is also going up, but it's still pretty low. And this is interestingly observed across all ages. So it's not just, young people read ebooks. I mean, everybody's discovering ebooks a bit. And how do people get their books? So this slide is a little concerning for us. Libraries are super important. Still about 50% of people are getting their books from libraries. Bookstores are super important. 50% of people are getting bookstores, but the percentage is going down. The access of books which is going up is downloading free online. And here we're still not 100% sure what this refers to exactly. Does it refer to downloading books from the National Library's excellent ebook offering, free ebook offering, or does it mean downloading pirated ebooks? I don't know. But it's good because it means more reading, but it's bad because it means, it's bad because it means people are not used to paying for books. They're getting used to thinking of books as something they should be getting free, which is a bit difficult when you're trying to produce more books. Borrowing from friends and family is important. Books are still a useful gift, 20%, which is great. And online selling is going up. Purchasing of online sales of books online is increasing. So that's the data according to the NLB. The National Arts Council did a survey in 2015 that looked specifically at the question of local books. And it was a bit tricky because because it's the NAC, they had to look at literary books. So the definition of literary books versus others might have been a bit confusing to some of the survey participants. But this was the deal. Not many people were reading books by Singaporean writers. Only 26%. So that was a bit concerning. That was a bit of a wake-up call to all of us to try to figure out, I think we knew that, but to try to figure out why that's the case and what we can do as an industry and working together with partners like NAC to try to bring that up. The retail picture in Singapore, book selling, is it's under some pressure. I mean, we've got some of the best bookshops in the world, I think. Kinokuniya as a kind of superstore, multilingual, books in Chinese, English, Japanese, French, and a great selection and a really nicely run store. Books Actually, you know, such a vibrant place, so full of personality. So we have some great bookshops, but it's tough because rents are super high. We also have Amazon and Book Depository. We've had them for some time, and they're roughly speaking about 20% of the local market, and maybe a little bit less now. But and one thing that we at the association complain about is that they don't charge GST. So when you buy a book from Book Depository, you know, free shipping, and you don't have to pay GST, so the prices are going to be 7% lower. We think that's a little bit unfair to our local bookshops who are facing this challenge. Most countries give a GST exemption to books. Books don't attract the tax, but Singapore is not like that. So that's also a bit of a burden. And our rentals are quite tough. So the space for bookshops in the last year, the amount of space for books has decreased a little bit. It's still holding more or less steady, but increasing a little bit. We're a bit concerned about that. And you know, you go into a bookshop and you can see this happening. You'll see people looking at a book, picking it up, and then going to their hand phone and seeing if they can get it cheaper online somewhere. This is an issue faced by the entire retail industry. But you know, the point is the value that the bookshops are providing in bringing books together and creating a really nice environment for you to discover new books that value is not being rewarded because the sale is going directly to the online player. So that's something that to be concerned about or to think about. That brings us to the issues and questions. And I just have a couple slides here. So why don't we zoom to this and then we can go, we can have more, open it up for more questions. So digitization, you know, I like to say that yes, we've been dealing with it since 1980s with desktop publishing. Yes, Amazon's been selling books online for 20 years. But the point is it's an ongoing process and it's still continuing. So digitization kind of unbundles content and allows you content to find new forms. And that's great, actually, because we're good at content, right? And so we can find new forms of content, but it can be painful, this kind of changes. And probably the hardest part about it right now is that all of this action is going on one device, you know, on our phone. So we're all of us now, all these different kinds of content are all coming to you from squeezed through that one device. And so that means the competition becomes pretty intense. But as I said, I think we're valuing the fact that the book is a kind of timeout. The printed book can be a timeout from time on your phone. Digital as a percentage of print is very different for different portions of the industry. And like I said, I think, you know, kids with a growing understanding that print is really key for kids and for growing up. I think that will, you know, keep print strong in education, consumer. But for professional publishing, that's the last of the red bars there. You know, it's going more and more digital. So the majority of dollars spent are actually happening digitally, and that's because content for professionals is delivered in bits and pieces when they need it. So you're a lawyer, you need to look up a case, whereas before you would go to the law library and pull out the book. Now it's all on screen. You need to find that reference, click, you go online and you find it right away. Same with academic researchers and so on. More and more of that research is done online. So it's very different for different industries, and it's happening at a different pace in different places. I think, yeah, we're a bit worried, again, as I said, about everything going through that one that, if everything is just happening in the screen, that's a bit of a waste of good bookshelves, if nothing else. And now, of course, we have our coronavirus. And what will that mean? We have quite an interesting and immediate challenge. And how to work with you as interns and how to run our companies and how to adjust to all of this is something that all of the members of the association are dealing with right now. So there's bad news. We've gotten our March sales figures and they were down already about 15, 20%, maybe a bit more. But of course, the slide in April and May is going to be very significant. Those of us who are selling books online have been able to keep selling books online, report an increase in sales, but look, when bookshops are closed, Amazon is prioritizing sending face masks and so on. So the hit in revenues is significant. And we'll see how it builds up in June, July, August, and so on. But the good news, I think, is that reading, it seems to be up. Most reports we're getting is that people appreciate, you can only watch so much Korean drama, right? Reading a book is a good change, and it seems to be, in some markets anyway, that reading is increasing. Reading is proving itself in staying at home. And those markets which are just now beginning to open back up, or where bookshops are classified as essential services, as they are in Italy and Germany, interestingly enough, in Spain, we're seeing a great pickup in books. So people are going to the bookshops, they're lining up, socially distant, only 2 or 3 people in the bookshop at a time. Maybe they're placing their order before they're coming, but they are buying books. So it'll be really interesting to see how our industry responds to this. And one of the challenges, of course, will be how to work with our interns now that we're working remotely. So this is new territory for us and for you. You won't have the stimulation of being in a new working environment and being able to chit-chat so easily with your colleagues, perhaps. So I just urge you to be patient and explore it all with us. The challenge is coming ahead. The supply chain, the bookshop chain is under pressure. Singapore is a small market, and of course, we're very open to books that are being published in different countries, where the prestige attached to books has got all of these systems to support that we don't quite have. But the biggest challenge is, are we making enough time to read? We're all super busy, but I can tell you, making time to read is worth it and is rewarding. Okay, so that's the end of a very long presentation. Thank you for your patience. And any further questions about publishing? Yeah, I have a question from Nixon, one of our publishers, on the digital way of distributing content. There's sort of 3 aspects to this. There's the online sales of print materials. There's the online sales of ebooks, and increasingly the online sales of audiobooks. And in Singapore, our ebook market is, our online e-commerce is, the offshore overseas players are quite big, right? Amazon and Book Depository. Our local players are not quite so strong, but I think we'll see them coming out of this crisis with more momentum. So the online bookshops, Kinokuniya has one, Books Actually is doing a great job. Different publishers are selling their books direct. Localbooks.sg had to stop during the crisis, unfortunately, but should be starting up again. And but our ebooks are mostly coming through, as you saw on one of the slides, people are buying ebooks from the overseas vendors, but we don't really have a local ebooks market. However, we have a great ebooks offering from our National Library. So if you haven't checked that out, I'd urge you to check that out. You can borrow ebooks very easily from the National Library. And speaking for NUS Press, I think our sales to the National Library increased dramatically in April. and were about, went up about 5 times because there was more demand for books to be read through the National Library. Sarah asked, will there be opportunities to pick up marketing and sales skills despite the current situation? Oh, absolutely. Because I think what the crisis is doing is forcing publishers to really double down on online marketing, right? On online events. You see, we're still finding our feet at the SBPA on how to do online events. I think all of us are looking to increase our skills and the amount of resources that we devote to online marketing. It's an area which has been giving good results to people who know how to do it. And I think you'll certainly pick up skills there. I certainly hope that by the time the internship is ended, we'll have some face-to-face events as well. But we'll see. So, and certainly another big part of it, another big part of how we sell books online is actually in just what we call the metadata, just getting the book information out into the channels. And you will certainly be involved in helping your publishers do that, gathering the book information, the blurbs, all of that, making sure that it's getting out into the online booksellers and all the different channels correctly. And that's actually a huge piece of book marketing. It's just the basics of gathering all that book information and making sure it's getting out there. And that doesn't change whether we're selling books in print, in bookshops, or online. Okay, great. If there are any more questions, I'll let me know. Otherwise, I've gone on a bit, way too long. So why don't we ask Juan to run you quickly through on, or Cecilia, actually, our executive director, will follow up and run us through a little bit more about the association and our members and our activities. So I'll give up the floor for Cecilia. So nice to meet you all virtually, and see you soon. I won't leave, but I'll mute myself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cecilia from SBPA, and I'm glad to see everybody here with me. And can I start with my presentations on what is the SBPA about? So let me first share my screen. Okay. So, okay, we have actually established in '68. It's more than 50 years in Singapore. And currently, we actually engage quite large wide of activities, in marketing and distribution activities in both print as well as digital format. So we focus on developing, strengthening our book ecosystem in Singapore. Okay, so from here you can see that we have a large number of members. Actually, we started off with like 22 members, and eventually we have grown ourselves to have 70 members, and they are of even 4 official language of Singapore. So you can see from here, like we have Asia Pac, which is Chinese and Lingzi, we have English Cornell, and we have I Love Reading, and etc. So we have directories that actually compile the full list of members that we have. Yeah. So here are some of the aims and objectives that we like to actually achieve. Of course, we like to extend a lot of useful activities, to actually build up the whole entire members group. Yeah. So we also encourage trade fair practice, fair trade fair practice, maintain high standard of professionalism and service in the industry, to cooperate with other associates representing similar alliance business, and to organize educational or cultural nature in Singapore and other countries of the world, to further reading of books, to encourage wide possible distribution of books in Singapore and even in worldwide. Okay, of course, you have met Peter. is our president for the year of 2018 to 2020. And we also actually run by a group of ESCO members that actually manage us at the secretarial department. Yeah. Then, of course, we also work with counselors and a subcommittee. We actually set up a subcommittee that actually manage all the different areas of activities and events that we have. Yeah, I'll go a bit fast on this. Yeah. So, however, our industry is divided into the 4 big areas, which is education, trade and general publishing, STM, the professional books that we have, and of course we have a new area which is the new media. Yeah. So some of the projects that we are doing, one of the big projects that we'll be doing for 2020 to 2012 is our SBPA book data system. We're going to set up a new system to help our publishers to actually to be more efficient in promoting their books and etc. And of course, we also have quite a fair bit of membership activities. And of course, internship program is also one of our important programs. And of course, we also work with a lot of stakeholders, government department. Yeah. Events that we actually organize, we had actually the Singapore Book Bazaar. And last year, we actually organized one at the Anchor Point, which is quite successful. And you can see that we have a lot of activity. But as I know, like right now, we have the COVID-19, so probably we will have to convert this into an online event. And of course, we also visit a lot of international trade fair to promote our Singapore book as well. And of course, our Singapore Book Award is actually another very established prestige events that we actually uplift the promote our local books as well. Of course, the internship. So these are the key government agencies that we work with. Yeah. Okay, here's our book award for 2019. So last year we did this award at Conrad Hotel, and it was overwhelmed with a lot of supporting publishers, and we had a lot of good products, good books that have been promoted over these events. Of course, some of the trade fairs that we actually participated, like this is from China, Beijing Book Fair, that we bring we bring our books across border to actually be promote. Frankfurt Book Fair is another exciting venue that we actually participate almost every year, and to meet up with the international partners. So this is what I actually shared previously, the Singapore Book Bazaar in 2019 at Anchor Point. We have about like 15 to 16 publishers that actually join us for book exhibitions to promote our local books. Okay, so what is coming up? For digital marketing training courses that is going to happen on the 19th June, I hope, publishers or even the interns, you will be invited to actually join us for this course. So you can actually learn about a bit more about digital marketing, over here. Yeah, so do register with us. And we have 2 professional trainers that is coming on board to actually share with us the subjects here. Yeah. And of course, for the publishers, we are going to have a meeting with Amazon, Lazada, and Shopee to see how we can actually do better in e-commerce. Yeah. And there is also a e-commerce booster package that actually ESG is supporting you to support your online business. Yeah. With that, I will end my presentations. Yeah. Okay. So if you have any, thank you so much for your attention.